Yes, we've moved all around the room. We've got a 30-minute session now, which will be a round table. We're going to pass the microphone around the room. We have Carlos Moreno, Margarita Luxón, José María Domínguez, John Aguirre-Zug, Miriam García, Pedro Galazo Martínez, and Cecil. I would like to ask a first question for your advice. If you had 500,000 square meters like we have in our refinery, 55 hectares, what would you do with it? In the next 10, 15 years, I think that's the time frame. Well, I will be brief. I know there's a lot of us here to comment, but tomorrow, in any case, I will be presenting the project to the technical team in Santa Cruz about what we would like to do. My dream would be to have a new central hub with mixed use, schools, medical services, parks, cultural spaces, social housing of a high quality, a mix of different social categories, but connected to the city, not a disconnected neighborhood, but part of the city that exists already. And I want it to be facing the sea, not giving it back to the sea. And a place where you can live, not a place that you can only enjoy at the weekends. I really hope also that there will be very few cars existing there, lots of bicycles instead, and a real living space. And would you apply this 330, 300 rule that Cecil was telling us about? Yes, this is completely complementary to everything that we defend: proximity, circularity. And we mustn't forget as well the new ways of working that we have these days. We relate to nature in a different way these days. We also need to create employment. If we create housing there, but the residents are going to have to travel for an hour to get to their place of work, well, that would be a real pity, because it would be a reduction in the quality of life of those residents. So I'm going to move around randomly. So first, John. Well, I would like to talk about how I would do it rather than what I would do. I'm sure there will be lots of great ideas here. We've heard lots of great ideas this morning, but I'd like to touch on what Miriam said. I think that Santa Cruz should focus on a few strategic projects, and these projects should be approached from a completely different perspective, collaborating between different institutions with citizens, businesses, and different departments. I was talking about this earlier, this networking is so important. I think a key thing to bear in mind is that we should listen much more actively and take part in a lot more roundtables like this, where we can hear different perspectives and build a project together that is transformative, has a positive impact, and will serve as a pilot project to transform the way of doing things, to show that a new way of doing things is possible, necessary, and better. Miriam. It's true that Santa Cruz has had its back to the ocean for decades now. Well, For me, Santa Cruz is a coastline. It's an amazing coastline, actually. And so for that reason, this way that we reflect on this new project needs to include the sea, reach the sea. Physically, we're not in contact with the sea, but the territory in general is. This refinery is a scar that is blocking the contact, and we have this road also that divides our city from the ocean. We need to change this infrastructure so that we get our identity back. We need to use this opportunity to connect once again with the sea. Yes, we need a green infrastructure by rebuilding these layers that used to exist between the land and the sea. We should think about it as a shared coastline, an inhabited coastline. If we just think about it as a chunk of city, then this will be a pity. So Jose Maria, we need to think about what used to exist. 1930s, this part of land was agricultural land. So what would you do? Well, first of all, the city that we all would like to see and that we've all talked about this morning is one that has been developed over a long period of time, decades, centuries. But we need to create this type of city in a very short period of time, and that's not easy. These projects that are done very quickly shouldn't really be trusted. First of all, we need to identify key processes, like you said, redefining the coastline, building a green infrastructure, interacting with the city. So I would create a neighborhood that in 50 years' time, it would be impossible to say if it was built all at once or built over a long period of time. It needs to have multiple functions, and it needs to be possible for people to enrich themselves by using this space. It's much easier to create huge dams, for instance, than it is to install a sustainable system of watering and acequias. And this is the mindset that we need to apply here. We need to be able to correct our mistakes from the past. Miriam, you talked about this scar that exists, this road network that separates us from the sea, and this refinery as well. This is a sunny area, a windy area with sea as well. We don't want too much sun exposure like in that Guadalajara square. But what would a good solution be, Margarita? Well, I would like to see a city that takes advantage of its orientation. The slope looks out to the sea. What I don't want to see when I look out at the ocean, though, is 4 huge cruise liners. So I suppose in my mind, I can't see a perfect vision, but I do have clear in my mind what I don't want to see. Well, I agree with what all of you have said, of course. I do think that these 55 hectares should be an experimentation space. There need to be 3 agents involved: politicians, technicians, and society, and perhaps 4, academia as well, because all of these proposals need to have scientific foundations, scientific backing. There's a wonderful book by Francis Muñoz from Catalonia. It's called Urbanization. he talks about how sometimes we walk through a city and we could be almost anywhere. Cities have lost their essence. They all look the same. So I think what we need to do here is to find our local essence that we can express, resulting in the best solution. Cecil, I have left you to the last, not because you're from the Netherlands, just because you were the last to speak.
No, these are all really good points. I would love to see a world-class 300 neighborhood, 15-minute city. And for the 300 component, I think we should really get inspiration from Miriam. And there should be mixed parks, coastal areas. I really like your idea of mixing the concepts and not separating them. And then this should be high quality, so everybody from Santa Cruz wants to go there. So you don't only people in the neighborhood, everybody wants to come and visit and see what a wonderful neighborhood it is, and ask the politicians to do the same elsewhere in the city. So that'll be my idea.
So
now is the time for the audience to ask their questions. Please feel free to raise your hand and ask your questions to any of our speakers. We have a question over here.
Hola, buenos días a todos y a todas. Yo soy Rosa.
Good morning, everyone.
Soy ciudadana de Santa Cruz.
Rosa. I live in Santa Cruz.
Bueno, sí me gustaría saber.
And I would like to know.
¿Por qué no lo hacemos?
Why don't we do it?
No termino de entenderlo. Yo creo que
can't understand why we haven't done this already.
Entonces enfocar cómo hacerlo. Y la pregunta es si ustedes son tan amables de trasladarnos esa posibilidad de por qué no lo hacemos,
perhaps
qué interés es lo que hay,
enlighten us as to why we're still asking these questions and how we can do it based on your experiences thus far. And of course, thank you to all of you. Thanks to the people and the entities that have made this event possible. Well, who would like to answer this? What's the most difficult part of a project like this? Well, they're financial constraints, I would say. How to do something that meets all of these requisites that we're all talking about, that is also financially feasible, that is profit-making, that offers different uses, tourism, residential, commercial, and that also offers that 40% of housing use, which is defined in law. That's what we need to build, and this involves a cost. We also have this additional cost of decontaminating the land before we even begin to do anything. So it's difficult, but it's possible. More questions. Another one over there. More people are raising their hands. We have 4 hands raised. Let's spend around 10 minutes on these questions before we go to lunch. I'm Miguel Rodriguez. I live in Santa Cruz, in one of its suburbs. I'd like to thank all of you, first of all, for your presentations. They were fascinating. I hope that a lot of what you put forward does come to fruition. But I would like to also give a call to action. Can we have a specific question, please? I'll ask a specific question then. When do you think we should stop throwing our waste into the sea? There are almost no water treatment plants here along our coastlines. Miriam, perhaps you'd like to answer this question. When should we stop throwing waste anywhere, I think is the question. What are the CO2 particles, the equivalent CO2 particles? Well, I think it's to do with the way of inhabiting a place, a way of consuming,
responsabilidad colectiva que
It's
tiene que ver
about
con una
a
materialidad,
collective
¿no? Margarita hablaba
responsibility,
de lo importante de la materialidad, de escoger materiales que
recognizing
sean
the
más
importance of the
resilientes,
materials
que
that
se
we
limpien por sí
choose,
solos. O
more
sea,
resilient,
es otra manera
self-cleaning
de pensar
materials.
que
So
no
it's
está
another way of
basada
thinking.
en la eficacia,
It's not based
sino
on
que está basada
efficiency,
en
but
la salud
rather
propia,
health
la del barrio que habitamos, la del
of the
planeta
health of
y
our
la
planet,
del mar,
of
que
the
es
neighborhood
solamente
that
uno
we
de los
live in, and the
ecosistemas más que
sea,
nos
which is
permiten habitar.
just another one of
Más
our
preguntas.
ecosystems on our
Si
planet.
alguien tiene el micro porque... A ver.
More questions.
Sí.
¿Qué tal? Todas las ideas que han puesto sobre la mesa son
Well,
súper necesarias, creo que son
I
súper
think
potentes.
that all of the
Pero, por
ideas you've
ejemplo,
put forward are
como
very
me preocupa que
necessary,
se haga
but
una inversión
I'm
muy fuerte
worried
económicamente en
that
todas
they
estas
will
propuestas
require a
y que, sin
great deal of
embargo, a la larga
economic
no podamos disfrutarlas,
investments.
porque los datos marcan que
That
los espacios mejor
perhaps in the
regenerados
long
los acaban
term
disfrutando
we
otras
might
personas que no viven en la
not
ciudad porque
enjoy.
se
It
gentrifican,
seems
¿no?
that
De
what
hecho,
we've
es una
seen in the
gentrificación que se
past
perilla.
is a lot of our
Entonces, en ese
places
sentido,
that have
agradecemos esta
received this
inversión,
funding
pero
have
luego,
been
¿cómo
gentrified, and
protegemos
it's
esos
been
espacios
other
que realmente son
people
para la
that have
ciudadanía de aquí?
enjoyed them.
Como
How
qué
can we
podemos hacer
ensure
para
that
que
this
no
space
se
will
perviertan y se
be
cedan,
used
sobre todo
by
en un lugar tan turistificado
the
como las Islas
locals,
Canarias,
and
a
it
otras
won't
personas que
turn
no
into
viven allí?
another tourist complex like our entire
Tiempo, perfecto.
archipelago has become?
Bueno, yo quería hilando con lo
Well,
por qué no
just
se hace y
linking
cómo se
this
hace
with
en
the
relación a esto,
question,
creo
why don't
que
we do it?
por qué
How
no se
do we
hace es
do
que creo
it?
que tampoco
Well,
ha
I think
habido hasta
the
hoy igual
answer is
el
perhaps
foro, el
that,
espacio para
and
que la
we
gente que
still
tiene igual que tomar
haven't
decisiones
today
desde esta
got a
perspectiva
forum
del consiliente, ¿no? Del urbanismo
linking
consiliente me han comentado, se
people
ponga a
with the
empezar a hablar.
decision
Creo,
makers. We
y
need
también
more
a
debate,
identificar los
more
intereses de
discussion.
cada
We
uno y
need
a
to
ponerlos
also
en juego. Creo
identify
que
the
tampoco tenemos
interests
como
of each of
o
these
hasta
involved
ahora la
parties.
capacidad o el poder de imaginación, cómo es la gestión de la complejidad de un proyecto y
We
estas
also need to think
características, y
about how
que
to
hoy se está
manage a
poniendo
project as
unas bases
complex as
muy
this.
sólidas a esto, y entonces
And
ahora,
this is
como
being
decía yo
thought about a
antes,
great
hay una
deal
valentía
already. There is a
¿no? para
great deal
hacer
of
esta
bravery
especie de proyecto de
behind this
experimentación,
project.
ahora
It's
que tan
very
de moda están los
it's
sandbox,
a
¿no?
great
Un sandbox del
experiment. We're
urbanismo,
using
y
the
con gracia todas estas
urbanism
cuestiones. Y en relación
sandbox,
a
for
eso,
instance, to
pues
look
mira,
at all of these questions. So
en
linked to this,
Barcelona
well,
también
in
hay una cuestión que
Barcelona,
creo que hay que analizar el después, ¿no? Y de lo que se
we've
llaman
been
las
looking at
externalidades
what happens
negativas, ¿no?
next,
Esto
these
yo se
negative
lo escuché precisamente
externalities.
hablando de regeneración urbana y de
I've
gentrificación,
heard
de lo
this
que se
when we
habla
talk
mucho,
about
es
gentrification
precisamente
and urban
identificar esas
regeneration. So
externalidades
what we're talking about is identifying these
negativas, ¿no? Y
negative
una de las cuestiones
externalities.
sobre las que tenemos que actuar, y
One of the
como
things that
país,
we need to
¿no? Y como Estado hay una grave crisis habitacional, etcétera, ¿no? O
address
sea,
is
viviendas
this
de política
housing
pública, pero no solo, ¿no?
crisis.
Es decir, todas estas cuestiones tienen que llevar acompañadas
But that's not
una
the
serie
only
de
one.
paquetes y medidas que
All of
precisamente,
these
¿no? conviertan
problems
todas
need to
estas
have
buenas
specific
palabras de, ¿no? de equidad,
policies that
inclusividad,
include
cercanía,
equity,
en realidades
inclusivity,
concretas. Pero
etc.,
ojo, como, y
but put
volviendo a
them
lo que he
into
dicho antes,
concrete
hay
actions.
intereses ahí. Y como
However,
dice José María, hay una
there
financiación, pues,
are
hay una propiedad del suelo, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces,
perhaps other
tendremos que
interests
ser capaces
behind
de,
all of
desde
these
el reconocimiento
decisions
de esos
being taken.
intereses y
So
de
we need
esas
to recognize those
escenarios
interests
no deseables,
and
el
these
tratar de
perhaps
mitigar esas
negative
externalidades negativas que puede generar
possibilities
un
need to be
proceso de estas
mitigated.
características.
Miriam, ¿querías decir algo?
Sí, solo quería decir una cosa también, que es un
So
proyecto que va a
I
llevar tiempo.
also just wanted to
¿no?
say that this is a challenge
Y
that
es
it's going to
importante
take a long
mantener,
time
generar los
to
consensos
address. We
y
need to
mantener la
ensure
palabra.
there's agreement, and we need to stick
Las
to our
orillas se han
words, stick to
gentrificado
our
porque no se ha
promises.
mantenido la palabra. Era una
It hasn't
infraestructura
been
de
something
21
that we've
calles y 21
done
plazas.
in the
Nosotros ganamos
past.
en Granado, he estado trabajando un año haciendo una plaza, que es un sud, o sea, y es que se han hecho 4. Que si se han
We
hecho 4,
promised
se gentrifica, ya no tienes
21
una infraestructura
squares
que
in one of our
entonces, es
projects, and only
importante
4 have
mantener la
been
palabra.
created. So the
Para
promise
que no se
was
conviertan en
broken.
anécdotas, para que no se
And this is
recalifiquen, para
sad
que
because
se
it
hagan
turns
tiempo las
into
viviendas
an anecdote, and people
sometidas
lose
a un
trust
régimen de protección
in
oficial que
these
permitan
plans, in
esa
these
equidad
authorities.
y esa mixtura
We need to protect this
demográfica y
equity,
socioeconómica.
this
Es importante
demographic and
mantener la palabra.
socioeconomic mix.
Carlos.
So we need to
Sí,
keep our
yo
promises.
aprovecho porque
Carlos.
es una muy buena pregunta
Yes, it's a great
y me
question, actually,
permite
and
evocar la diferencia
it gives
entre
me
las superillas,
the
como
opportunity
lo
now
dice
to
Miriam, basado en
mention
infraestructuras
something that
con el
Miriam
proyecto que
said.
haremos en París de proximidad y
In
circularidad, que llevamos
Paris,
hace
we
los
focused
15
on
minutos, que está
proximity and
basado en un concepto
circularity. this
distinto, que es
15-minute city,
la
which is based on a different
ingeniería
concept.
social,
Social
socioeconómica de servicios.
engineering,
O sea,
the
cuando
economy of
regeneramos
services.
los barrios nuevos que he
When we
mostrado, que
regenerated
corresponde
those
un poco a este tipo de
neighborhoods
proyectos,
that we
que lo que
showed,
preside ese proyecto es una ingeniería
what
socioeconómica.
went
En
behind,
París
what went
tenemos
before
3
that was
empresas de la ciudad
social
que
engineering. We have 3
promueven
companies
y
in Paris,
implementan la
society
vivienda social
companies that
como
promote
ingeniería
social housing
socioeconómica
as a
ligada al
type of
desarrollo infraestructural. Eso es
socio-economic
vivienda social.
engineering.
Segundo,
So
tenemos
it's
una
this
empresa
social
de la
tool.
ciudad
We also have a
que estimula el
company in the
comercio de
city which
proximidad, que
stimulates
arrienda a los locales, que
local
forma a los
commerce,
emprendedores,
that
que los ayuda a
trains
desarrollar su business
entrepreneurs,
plan,
that
que
helps
les
them to
enseña
build
a
their
practicar
business
el comercio.
plans, that shows them
Tercero,
how to build their
tenemos
businesses. And
empresas de la
third,
ciudad
we
que
have
manejan
a,
los espacios públicos,
company
las
in the
zonas verdes,
city that
los
is in charge of
árboles,
managing
el
public
agua. El
spaces, the
parque que mostré
squares, the
esta
trees,
mañana
the water.
de 3
The park
hectáreas
that I
sobre
showed you earlier
54
of
fue
3
una decisión
hectares,
política de la
this was a
ciudad.
political
La
decision
ciudad,
taken by the
si se hubiera
city to make
interesado
this
a
park.
ganar dinero
If the
sobre los
city wanted
54
to
hectáreas,
earn money with
hubiera
these
hecho
44 hectares,
45
then they would
hectáreas
have made
de
44
edificios
hectares of
y
buildings
arrendarlos o
and
venderlos.
either
Como
rent
es
them
un
or
proyecto
sell them.
político
But
de la
because
ciudad,
it was
se
a
decidió
city
hacer un
political
parque de
project,
3
they decided to
hectáreas
make a park of
con un
3
paisaje
hectares
de
with
diferentes
a
tipos
landscape
de
of different
ecosistemas, desde el húmedo
ecosystems,
hasta los jardines pedagógicos. Se colocaron las escuelas
learning gardens,
alrededor del
among
parque,
others.
se
Schools
colocaron las
were
residencias
situated
para
around the park,
estudiantes y se dio
student
50% de esa
accommodation as
zona al
well, and
hábitat social.
50% of
Lo que preside para evitar esa
the
gentrificación
surface area
es
was
un proyecto
dedicated to
político
social
de
housing.
ciudad
This was a
manejado por el bien
political
común porque hace parte del
decision
programa del
with
gobierno
the
de
common
la
good
alcaldía de la ciudad, que
at
es
the
válido
forefront.
para esas 54 hectáreas y que es válido para todas las hectáreas en las cuales la ciudad puede influenciar. Y por esa razón
The
se
city had an
votó el Plan
opportunity
Local
here,
Bioclimático de Urbanismo que
and
generaliza
they
ese modelo
voted
en toda la ciudad
to
para luchar contra la gentrificación, contra
repeat
la segmentación
this
y
model
contra
all over the city.
simplemente el constructivismo económico
There was
basado
a shift
en
in
beneficios,
trend
simplemente
where this
metiendo más gente para rentabilizar.
constructivism,
Esa es
building
para
more
mí
and more
lo
buildings, was
esencial en este tipo de
rejected,
proyectos.
and
Una
this type
visión
of
política
project
de
was
ciudad
preferred. And
basada
so
en
this
un bien
is key,
común
this
más que
political
la
vision that's
rentabilidad de
focused on the
tal
common good more than just
inversor,
profitability. That's what's
inversionista.
going to be important here.
Oye.
More questions, please.
Más preguntas había. Perdona, que no la había visto.
¿Ahora? Buenos días, gracias por...
Well, hello everyone, thank you.
Yo tenía una duda muy interesante,
I have
por lo menos para mí, que
a
sería,
question.
yo estoy acuñando el término de arquitectura con H, de happy architecture, o architecture for
Happy
happiness, arquitectura para la felicidad.
architecture or architecture for
He estudiado sobre
happiness
la
is
felicidad, la
is a
felicidad de la
term that's
felicidad,
come about. It's
y se
based
ha hablado
on
hoy de
happiness
soldado, yo he escuchado
studies, and it has been mentioned
a
this
Carlos, lo he visto
morning.
en su diapositiva,
Carlos mentioned it
y
in
me
one of
gustaría
his
saber
slides. And
de
I
cada
would
uno de
like to know
vosotros métrica relacionada
if you
con
know of any
cómo podemos
metrics
medir la felicidad
that
de las actuaciones
exist,
que
how
realmente
we can
hacemos, que
measure
diseñamos.
happiness
Porque lo
of
que no
the
se mide,
things
ya sabemos.
that
Entonces,
we
esa sería mi
do, of
pregunta.
the
Gracias.
projects that we implement. That's my question.
Podemos empezar midiendo lo que no
Well,
es
we could
felicidad, ¿no?
measure
Por
what
tanto,
isn't happiness.
y un
We could start
estándar
there,
es,
and
digamos, la propia salud.
this can be measured in death rates, no? For instance,
En cantidad de parámetros,
we
¿no?
can
Es
see
decir,
the things that
respecto a
influence premature
la
deaths
respuesta, ¿no? de las personas a su medio ambiente. Hay que plantear que en el tema
that are
felicidad con mayúsculas
often a
depende de
result of the
propios
environment that
vitales,
these people live in.
vitales, que escapan del medio ambiente. Nosotros urbanistas somos importantes, pero que cada uno piense en su propia vida,
Urban
¿no? A ver si la felicidad depende principalmente del barrio
planners
donde vive, ¿no? No es así.
are very aware of the
Pero,
importance
hay
of our environment on our
más,
happiness, but it doesn't.
digamos,
It's not the only thing that determines our happiness, of course.
Del entorno, ¿no? Lo habéis hablado todos, ¿no? En relación
We've all
con la respuesta
talked
humana. Entonces,
about the
en relación
human
con-
response to
hay
our
sí que tenemos
environments,
parámetros,
and there are
perfecta
parameters
referencia de
that we can
beneficia
use, for
segmentada de cada
instance,
una de
to
las, posibles
You know, we have data on school abandonment or depression, things that can be measured. For instance, we know that in poorer neighborhoods, everything is very dark. People get divorced more, the kids drop out of school, housing is in a poor condition. What we're not that clear on is if in the better off neighborhoods, everything is all roses. So I do think, though, that there is some data out there that could be helpful to us. There's a lot of interesting articles written about the level of Alzheimer's in people that live in certain neighborhoods. As Miriam said, there are things that are at project level, making sure a neighborhood is useful for people that have dementia, for instance. Well, we need to look at all of the details there, every street corner. Oftentimes, we don't take this care in our plans. For instance, in Madrid, we have banks on high streets. But we often don't have enough banks. So that means that older people aren't able to access their banking services because they're just too far away. So we haven't taken them into account in that decision making. Rather, benches. If we don't have enough benches, then older people won't be able to enjoy spending time outside because they won't have anywhere to fit. Cecil, please talk to us about the well-being brought about by trees. We just heard that divorce rates are higher in poorer neighborhoods. I think that's probably true in richer neighborhoods as well. But Cecil, you were saying that having 3 trees in view from your place of work or residence, that contributes to your well-being and your happiness.
Absolutely. So there's quite some research in the green field that looks specifically at happiness and has some happiness indicators. I can give one example from Denmark. Knowledge workers that actually had green access. Knowledge workers that had access to green space, they were performing 15 to 20% better, and they had less sick days. And when they were asked how they felt coming to the job at work in the morning, in greener workplace, they said actually they were happier. So they didn't wake up in the morning like, oh, I have to go to work. They felt like, oh, it's a good thing. So actually, yeah, I think we can learn a lot from architecture and also landscape design, how we can deal with happiness. I always say that I'm a chief happiness officer trying to make cities greener. So thank you for the question.
Sí, claro.
Una cosa, además del acceso a la naturaleza.
So there's access to nature, but there's also access to people. What makes us most happy, and in the graphs that you were showing, apart from this access to nature, is our ability to have human contact and build links with our communities. That's what makes humans most happy. It's lunchtime, so please be brief. Well, we were talking earlier about gentrification. There is also ecological gentrification. It's happened in the US, in Malmo. It's also happened in Berlin. So I think when we do projects like this, to avoid this ecology being gentrified, we need to work with the whole city. In any case, this famous vertical forest building in Milan did gentrify and people were displaced. In the Netherlands, there are now vertical forests, and part of the structure is reserved for low-income families. Happiness is driven, or depends upon the city that you live in. It's very hard to measure happiness, but what I can say is that there are proven systems to measure our mental health. There's a European survey for health. There are also some metrics, some paid service and some others that can give you an idea of the happiness of people, but they're complex concepts. Thank you for your questions. You're doing amazing. We've been here for hours already, and we have a long afternoon ahead of us. So we'll have our last question now, please. Those questions that you haven't been able to ask, please feel free to write them on our website, and we will try to offer answers over the next few days. Last question. Good afternoon. I quite naively would like to ask if all of these solutions that you've put forward are able to be applied on an island. This is an island that is full of people, full of cars. Can we really realistically apply these models here? Because there is a very complex political system here, lots of opposing opinions. Well, thank you. So I suppose you're asking if it's technically feasible, and if we're ready, if we have the mentality required to put in place these types of solutions. I think you were talking about this island condition. This is an archipelago, so yes, there's a great deal of intense use of the coastline. There's a lot of coastline, right? And at the same time, to be able to adapt, we need to improve our autonomy and not import so much from the mainland. We need to have a regenerative, adaptive capacity. But there are certain realities that we can't deny. Carlos, I'm just going to add to Miriam's answer. I have an example of a place that's not an island, but it's Amsterdam in the 1970s. In one of my books I've written in Spanish, I talk about this. In the year 1975, Amsterdam was the city with the most child deaths in the world for car accidents. 3,500 per year. And so a movement was created when the son of a journalist was run over. And the movement was called Don't Kill Any More of Our Children. At that point in time, Amsterdam was a car warehouse with this terrible number of deaths. 25 years later, Amsterdam was able to transform this situation. They pedestrianized streets. They said streets are for children, and everyone started using bicycles. And I am sure other cities compare themselves to Amsterdam and think, well, this isn't feasible for us. But bear in mind, this took them 25 years. In 25 years, lots of things can change. Democracy is real. We can vote to make political change. I'm not that familiar with the political situation here, but if you are able to identify politicians who are committed to these visions, then this political will eventually prevail. Thank you, Carlos. Well, I suppose you have a socialist mayor in Paris, this helps, of course. And you've worked a great deal with her. Here, things are a little bit more complicated. Well, I suppose what you're talking about is the death of our success. We have a great deal of wealth here, which is based on tourism above all. And so everything that diversifies this economy here will lead to a longer-term growth, recovering agriculture. Nobody wants to be a farmer anymore. We get our tomatoes from Morocco these days. Our energy comes from Fuerteventura. We have a biosphere reserve here, but we need to be more self-sufficient. In Minorca, this is another biosphere reserve. What we need to do is to accept a reduction in our GDP growth. And it's very difficult because everything's measured in GDP, but this will ensure a more diverse and resilient growth. The problem here is that there's been a gold rush of tourism. It was an economy that flourished at one time, but we're seeing now the oldest tourism centers, Redonda's film, for example, the La Palma beach, are having problems now. So what we need to do is diversify the economy of the islands, recover agriculture. This seems like a very romantic idea, but it's actually very important. And how do we diversify an economy? Well, bringing our entrepreneurs to more diverse environments. Why can't we have high technology here? We can't just offer services. Why can't we have industry, handicrafts, ecological and non-organic agriculture? We need to diversify. Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here talking about the future of Santa Cruz. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending the morning with us. We do have a lunch for everybody downstairs. We have 1 hour for lunch. Please, at 3:30, I would ask you to be back here to see if we can catch up. We'll see you very shortly. Those of you that aren't going to come back this afternoon, and if you do have a translation device, please leave it as you leave the room. We're going to use them again this afternoon. Thank you.